Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Raise Her Gaze. This is a podcast for women, and it's about raising our consciousness, raising our gaze, raising our frequency. But part of raising our consciousness is actually about knowing, having an awareness around more that's available to us. And today's conversation may be the most exciting one we've had so far with Daniel Roytas. And we're here to talk today about menopause and why your menopause symptoms may not be caused by hormones. So welcome, Daniel.
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you
Hi.
so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed, a pleasure to have you. So tell us what got you into this work that you're currently offering and talking about.
Yeah, I've been in the natural medicine space for nearly 2 decades as a naturopath, nutritionist, herbalist, psychotherapist, hypnotherapist. I went and did some training in Chinese medicine and a whole bunch of different things. I worked in clinical practice for 10 years and I was a senior lecturer at colleges and a university here in Australia until 2022, uh, and then basically resigned because I was very disillusioned with what I was teaching.
Mm.
And a lot of that came down to realizing that we're wrong about, or very confused at the least about the human body and health. And I think a lot of our understanding is back to front. And if we just look at things a little bit more logically and critically, the pieces of the puzzle fit together quite beautifully. But as it stands, the current conventional so-called wisdom really confuses a lot of people, and I don't think it needs to be that way.
No,
So I've been
it's,
questioning everything from menopause to depression to basically every health condition.
yeah. Yeah, it's having that critical mind, isn't it? It's keep asking those questions and peeling back the layers further and deeper than just sort of taking what you're told and then accepting that, isn't it? Which I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, and I mean this is a product of the education that people get when they go to college. So they come out as a practitioner and they just regurgitate what they got taught in the textbooks. Now, it wasn't until I mean, I did the same thing when I was writing curriculum and teaching at the uni. I did the same thing. And it wasn't until I actually looked at the references at the end of the sentence where there was a claim being made about something. And I went to that source material and read it and realized that, hang on a second, what they've used as the reference doesn't actually support or prove the claim that they've made. And that
Yeah,
was true of basically uh, the overwhelming majority of things that were written in textbooks ranging from anatomy and physiology to nutritional biochemistry to, you know, every aspect of the whole
yeah,
degree I was teaching in. So, I mean, that was a big realization. And when you come out as a clinician and you've spent a lot of time and money
mm,
learning that, and then someone goes, hang on a second, I think it's not correct. Most
yeah.
people don't want to listen because it's very confronting and it means they've got to basically set aside everything they thought they knew and start again from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. I've always had that mindset myself as a practitioner that your real learning actually starts when your degree is finished. You actually learn more from being in real life and working with patients in real time. And then that's when the questions start coming up because what you were taught doesn't necessarily work. And then you have to start asking more questions and finding out for yourself what actually does work. And then you build up this body of experience and, evidence for yourself that actually there is a different way. But then it's also, I find the difficulty is trying to help the patients to understand when you're maybe one of the minority that's saying it's not actually what we've believed all of this time. So how do you find that element of your work when you're speaking to the general public?
Um, I find that when most people hear what I'm saying, or most of my audience anyway, it clicks. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's probably a lot of people out there who hear what I'm saying and go, this guy's doesn't know what he's talking about. But again, I think that there's a lot of ego there that people are just not willing to let go of and think about things slightly differently. And
Mm,
I mean, the way that we arrive at a lot of these assumptions about the human body and health and wellness is through faulty logic. So, I mean, if you take menopause, for example, it is said to us, if you go into a anatomy and physiology textbook or a pathophysiology textbook, it's labeled as menopausal syndrome is labeled as a disease that is caused by a deficiency in progesterone or estrogen. Now, how they arrived at that conclusion was
mm,
that they had women who had symptoms. They gave them hormone replacement therapy, estrogen or progesterone, and their symptoms went away and said, oh, well, that must mean
mm,
that it was caused by a deficiency of estrogen or progesterone. But you see, you can't, that it's sort of working backwards there, using reverse, it's not even really logic. It's like
yeah.
affirming the consequent.
Yeah.
It's like post hoc rationalization. So
Hmm.
the reason why that's problematic is because when you use that logic and you apply it to something else, you can immediately see the problems with it. So someone has a headache, you give them Panadol or paracetamol,
Hmm.
and their headache goes away. You can't then say, well, it must have been because they have a paracetamol deficiency,
No.
right? You can only you have to work through things in a stepwise, logical, rational, scientific
Mm,
approach.
yep.
But we haven't done that for a long time, and now we find ourselves in this place where everyone is utterly confused and they don't
Yeah.
know where to turn or what to do.
Yeah. This is why I love Chinese medicine, because it hasn't changed in 5,000 years, and it's like the way I describe it is that Western medicine was derived from the study of dead bodies. So it's almost like they're looking at the body like a car and they're saying, oh, this part's broken, so we'll just fix that. They're not looking at the whole and how it all works together. Whereas in Chinese medicine, it was more the study of living organisms and how they interface with the seasons and, life as a whole. And it's a holistic, organic system, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. And one thing that I've found interesting is that in a lot of these traditional types of medicines, be it Ayurveda or naturopathy or Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, is that they have practiced and thought about the body a certain way for a really long time.
Mm,
And only recently have they started to deviate away from that understanding to align with and be accepted by mainstream medicine. Now, I'll give you an example that relates to TCM. Prior to, I think it was 1965, if you go to any traditional Chinese medicine textbook prior to 1965, there was no mention of any condition called menopausal syndrome. It didn't exist. It wasn't a
no,
thing.
no.
But only after that point in time did they invent a word to define menopausal syndrome. And they did that to align more closely with Western medicine so that they could integrate with it.
Yeah,
Right. So why didn't they have a word for menopausal syndrome prior to 1965? Is that because there was no such thing in places like China prior to that? And if there
yeah,
wasn't a condition known as menopausal syndrome prior to that, why?
yeah. I think I know why. It's like, it's the lifestyle, isn't it? Like in the East, there is this more holistic way of living in communion with nature and, the Tai Chi they do, the Qigong, the meditation, their understanding of yin and yang. So for me, the way I see it is that yin and yang are the primary kind of substances from which everything else manifests. So when we end up, so like thousands of years ago, they didn't have microscopes. so they couldn't see particles. So they were just working with balancing yin and yang in general, like heat and cold. And then thousands of years later, they came along with microscopes and they found hormones. And then they pinned all the responsibility for every single symptom onto one tiny little particle called a hormone. And now all of a sudden, the hormone is responsible for everything. But the hormone itself is either yin or yang. So the estrogen is more yin and the progesterone is more yang. And so that's what I do in my work, is I just balance out the yin and the yang ultimately. And then there are particular organs which I find are more often involved. So over the years of me treating my patients, I would listen to a patient tell me all of her symptoms, and she'd be saying to me, I'm here for my hormones, okay? It's my hormones. And then she'd list all the things she's experiencing: headaches, hot flushes, waking at 3 in the morning and not being able to get back to sleep. And she'd say, it's my hormones are causing my headaches. It's my hormones that's causing my insomnia. It's my hormones. And in my head, I'd be thinking, it's not your hormones, it's your liver. It's not your hormones, it's your liver. And then I would just treat the liver. And the next session, she'd be symptom free. And so I thought, I need to write a book called It's Not Your Hormones, It's Your Liver. And that's where all of my work kind of developed from. And then I created a quiz for ladies to take, and then it helps them to identify which organ it actually is for them, because we're all a different constitutional type. So for the majority of women, I would say it's the liver, but then some it's the kidney, for some it's the heart. And then once they know what that root cause organ is, we just balance the yin and yang of that organ. And yeah, that's basically how I see it.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the way I sort of approach the whole field of health and wellness is by looking at historical records. Now, why I do that is because if there was a point in time where human beings were completely healthy and they weren't suffering from disease, wouldn't it make sense that you would want to study them and find out what their diet and their lifestyle and their thought patterns and basically all of the things that they do in their life are?
Yeah.
Well, it just so turns out that there was a time where people were healthy and they weren't walking around with all these chronic illnesses that we see today.
Mm.
We have so much anthropological evidence of doctors, scientists, anthropologists, researchers going into nature and connecting with people who live in uncontacted tribes, living the way that they have lived since forever. And I mean, these doctors and anthropologists, they had the question of, gee, we want to go and connect with these people because they must be so sick. If they haven't got
Mm.
hospitals and the wonders of modern medicine, how are they surviving? They must be riddled with disease. What do they do for autoimmune disease? And what do they do for all these kinds of illnesses? And the interesting thing is, whenever they've gone and connected with those people and done medical assessments and examinations on them, they're all healthy. They're not sick. Now, in relation to menopause, there was an anthropologist, I think, who wanted to find a herbal medicine that would provide symptomatic relief to women in the West suffering from menopausal syndrome.
Mhm.
And she had the same idea. I'm going to go out into nature and connect with the natives and ask them, what do you use for hot flushes? And what do you use for irritability and mood swings and insomnia? And the list goes on. So she went there and sat down with the women and the shamans, asked the question. They said, what are you talking about?
Mm.
We don't have a herbal medicine for this thing that you're asking us about because we don't have this disease. So she basically left empty handed. But I mean, in the experiments where they've looked at menopause specifically, what they've found, doctors have found, is that the women in nature who have no menopausal symptoms at all
Mm.
have the same hormone levels as women in the West. Now, the prevalence of menopausal syndrome and symptoms in those tribal communities is 0%.
Mhm.
In the West, it's about 80%. So that's a big disparity.
Yep.
Why is it so different? Well, I mean, we can get into that conversation, but
Yeah.
that point is really, really important because what it tells us is that it cannot be the hormones that are
No.
the cause of the problem.
Mm.
So that whole theory, I think that it could be right, but that's a pretty glaringly obvious inconsistency with the
Yeah.
theory that it's the hormone deficiency that's the cause of the issues. Because you've got a
Yeah.
whole bunch of women who had the deficiency and never experienced a single symptom.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So I've been submitted some questions by some of my audience for you. So if you want to get more into like the individual symptoms and things, then we can start there if you'd like to.
Sure. Yeah.
So a lot of the women that come to me, especially younger women as well, are afraid of menopause because of what they're being told in the media. And a lot of women I find that haven't even got any menopausal symptoms are going on to HRT to prevent future things like muscle mass loss or bone loss. What are your thoughts on that?
I was absolutely blown away by some of the papers that I've read where they specifically assessed bone loss, osteoporosis, the prevalence of osteoporotic fractures in these native tribeswomen.
Mm.
And again, the prevalence of osteoporotic associated fracture was zero. It wasn't a thing,
Yeah,
even though their bone mineral density had declined. So we see a bone mineral density decline in the West, but we also see it in these native tribes. But they weren't experiencing the fractures, which is the thing that's the major problem for people.
yeah,
So, like, what on earth is going on there? Why is that the case?
yeah,
Um, it's certainly not like I don't see how taking hormone replacement therapy would address that or
mm,
prevent a fracture when those women who weren't taking HRT, who also had low hormone levels, weren't experiencing it. There,
yeah,
there's more going on here, and I'm not telling people not to go to their doctor, and if they feel the need to go on HRT, like you do whatever you need to do with, and you work that out with your doctor. I'm just sort of relaying some information here that might get people to think a little bit laterally about things.
yeah. Like I would rather people try things like acupuncture and looking at their diet and their lifestyle as a whole before going to the doctors and asking about HRT, but it seems to be the other way around. People tend to go straight to the doctor, and then if HRT doesn't work for them, they might not even know that there's an alternative because the Western viewpoint doesn't really advertise anything other than HRT, does it?
Yeah, and you know the interesting thing about these fractures is that we think you have a fall and then the fracture occurs.
Hmm.
So that the fracture is a consequence of someone falling in their older age. But what they think actually happens is that the fracture happens first and then you fall. So the
Right.
fall is a consequence of the fracture. So then maybe this has more to do with the structure surrounding the skeleton. So all your tendons and ligaments and your muscles, the quality, the tone, the size, whatever of those um, structures rather than the skeleton itself. Now, certainly women living in those tribes and in nature would be moving a lot. They would be very physically active, and it's possible that their muscle mass and their muscle tone was much better than women in the West who might lead a very sedentary lifestyle. And obviously, there's other things to consider here, but
Yeah.
I do find all this, you know, very interesting. There's a lot of food for thought here.
Yeah. I was listening to my partner the other day. He was on the phone to an old school friend and they were kind of like catching up over decades that they hadn't seen each other. And my partner was telling his friend about his parents and he was saying about how his mum had had a stroke and passed away. His stepdad is starting to lose his memory, but then his father, who's got a farm, and they're going to bed at 8 p.m. every evening and they're up at 5 and they're out all day working on the land and everything. His father and his wife are absolutely healthy and they're a lot older than his mother and stepfather were. And so that to me was interesting because that conversation happened just before I saw your post, which I shared about the Mayan tribeswomen. And people were asking me, why do you think, like, what is it about their lifestyle that's so different? I'm like, well, number one is the fact they're outdoors and they work in the land and they're in, as you say, they're moving, they're strengthening, they're working with their hands, they're eating food that's coming straight from the earth. It's got the full nutrient profile. But then also, it's like it's a range of factors, isn't it? I think it's like that's number one. And then it is emotional for some women and it is exhaustion for some women as well. So, like, women today are expected to work full-time jobs, have children, look after aging parents, and all of that usually collides around the time that menopause starts to happen. And menopause itself is a transformation from a Chinese medicine perspective. So you need some energy in the tank in order for your body to transform into a new phase, into a new archetype, into the wise woman. And if they're exhausted from all of this overwork, they haven't got anything left in the tank. And so all of these symptoms are the body's way of showing you, I'm out of balance, you know? And then one of the ways to come back into balance the quickest, I would say, would be like spending time in nature and being more active and eating more whole foods and getting proper rest, isn't it?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. This is basically the crux of the matter is that I, I don't think it's any one thing. I don't think you can point to one thing and go, it's X. I
No.
think it's a combination of various different factors. Now, by very virtue of being outside and living and existing in nature, which is where humans existed since ever, it's only really in the last century that
Mm.
we've, maybe even the last few decades, where we've really moved from working predominantly outside to inside. I mean, by very virtue of living outside or existing outside, you're moving your body, you're
Mm-hmm.
being exposed to sunlight, you're being
Yep.
exposed to fresh air, you're being exposed to uh, plants and trees and various different things. Your feet are connected to the ground, you're constantly earthing. Uh, you're foraging for your own food. You're hunting and gathering. You're eating local, seasonal, fresh, real food. You have a community of people around you to support you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've seen the systematic destruction of the family unit in the last few decades, and now women are completely, as you pointed out, trying to do things for themselves, and it's very overwhelming. So they get very stressed, and lots of other things sort of get affected because of that
Yeah.
impacts their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I'll also say this because I think this is a big factor that not many people really pay attention to. I don't think that the human body actually ever does anything wrong.
No.
And medicine loves to point to the body. They
Mm.
love to point to the cholesterol or the hormones or the inflammation or whatever. They want to point to something in you that's the problem. I think what happens is that when the body is exposed to something that it doesn't need, or it doesn't get something that it does need, then it will set in motion a series of physiological effects which are designed to bring the body back to balance. Now, we would think of those things as symptoms, and we've confused symptoms as the disease. So
Mm.
let me give you an example here. When women menstruate, according to the mainstream science, certain so-called toxic chemicals, which are labeled endocrine disruptors, concentrate in the endometrium, in the lining of the uterus, and then that gets sloughed off each month.
Hmm.
So the menses, the menstrual cycle and the blood that's lost is essentially acting like a portal or a channel of elimination for these toxic substances that the liver and the kidneys have a really hard time getting rid of. Now, it turns out that your body can increase the thickness of the endometrial lining by increasing concentrations of hormones like estrogen. So now, if you're being exposed to a bunch of toxic stuff in your environment and your body's going, oh my God, I'm being poisoned, we need to get this stuff out. And it's not so easy to get it out through the liver and the kidneys, it's much easier to get it out through the blood. You could think of like menses like a form of bloodletting almost.
Yeah.
Um, it will increase estrogen to increase the thickness of the endometrium so you can get more toxic stuff in there and get rid of it every month.
Hmm.
Now, when you stop menstruating, you go into menopause, you don't have that loss of blood every month. So, where's that toxic stuff going to go that you are otherwise eliminating through your menstrual fluid? Is it
Exactly.
possible that the body says, let's turn up the heat and start sweating it out? Now,
Yeah.
we know that those same toxins come through the skin because there's been experiments that have been done that have collected sweat from people and measured the levels of those toxic substances.
Wow.
And then you find other evidence that shows that women who have more frequent or so-called irregular or heavier periods
Hmm.
have significantly less of these toxic substances floating around their body. Now, we would consider those toxic substances to be endocrine disrupting substances, but I don't think they are disrupting the endocrine system at all. I
No.
think that they're just poisoning the body,
Hmm.
and the body is responding by increasing certain hormones and decreasing others to facilitate that physiological response that allows for it to be removed in the menses.
Yeah.
And, thinking of it that way, I'm not saying that is how it happens, but thinking of it that way as a possibility is
Mm.
vastly different and more freeing for women than thinking or being of the belief that there's something wrong with me, that I'm broken, that it's my hormones and I need to go to war with the body to suppress these pesky hormones or clear them out or do whatever else
Yeah.
it is that practitioners try and do for their clients.
Exactly. Yeah. And that leads back to it's not your hormones, it's your liver, potentially. But like
Well,
now
yeah, it would be
after,
the toxic substances that are burdening the
yeah,
liver, right? Because the liver is just trying to
exactly.
do its job, but if it's getting poisoned, it's
Yeah.
going to go, "Hey, we can't accept any more poison here today. Sorry, go find somewhere else." Oh,
Yeah.
we'll go to the kidneys then. And eventually the kidneys go, "Nah, we can't do it." Oh, where else can we go? All right, we'll go to the endometrium.
Mm.
And then, your endometrium gets full and it goes, "Right, well, where else can we go?" Oh, we'll try and go out through the sweat. And the
Yeah.
body will just keep trying all these different places to get rid of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then you think about like what would happen if you suppress that. It doesn't bear thinking about really, does it?
but this is what happens. I mean,
I know.
what we're seeing, the symptoms is the body's attempt to rectify the problem.
Yeah.
And if you go in and try and suppress that by taking hormone replacement,
Yeah.
maybe in the form of the OCP, like the oral contraceptive pill or
Mm.
HRT, uh, what are you doing? Where is that toxic stuff going to go? What tissue is it then going to accumulate in?
Yeah.
And are you actually robbing Peter to pay Paul by
Mm.
doing that? just
Yeah,
kicking the can down the road, so to speak.
definitely. Yeah. So one of the things that I always recommend my patients to do, particularly in springtime, is a liver cleanse. So I tend to follow the seasons. So we do a liver cleanse in spring, and then we do more kind of like heart balancing with meditation and mindset and things in the summertime. We look after the spleen in late summer, which is now. And then in autumn time, we do a very gentle large intestine cleanse. And then during winter, it's looking after the kidneys and making sure that everything's warm and nothing cold goes into the system. So, like, what would you recommend? So, people who are listening to this now and they're thinking about things differently, what would you recommend that they sort of start with in their own lives
Yeah, I
to look
think
after
that
themselves?
what you've recommended there is very sound,
Mm,
and I certainly share a similar perspective to you on this. I mean, it's very difficult to make sort of specific recommendations for people because I think every situation is going to be a little bit different.
hmm.
But, some general advice here is for people to do an audit of their life and think about all of the different sources of these so-called toxic chemicals, these forever chemicals or endocrine disrupting chemicals that they're being exposed to. Because the less you're exposed to, the less you have to detoxify from.
Yeah,
And I mean, the reason they call them forever chemicals is because they're incredibly difficult for the body to dispose of. So, I mean, prevention is better than cure.
yeah,
So, like, you have to think, where are these toxic chemicals? Where do we find them? Well, I mean, they are in women's hygienic products. They're in tampons, they're in pads, they're in makeup, they're in deodorant and perfume, they're in synthetic clothing, they are in cleaning products and washing detergents. And I mean, this stuff is absolutely everywhere. So
yeah,
if you're a woman who is putting on lots of makeup that's for this stuff, and you're spraying perfume on yourself, and you're doing the washing and the cleaning at home, and you're being exposed to these toxic chemicals through those routes, and maybe you're cooking food and putting it in plastic containers, and it's leaching from the plastic container into your food. I mean, just doing an audit of your life and going, where can I minimize my exposure to these things where possible? What, like personal care products, shampoo, soaps, conditioners, lathering your body potentially in this stuff 2, 3 times a day.
yeah.
And whatever you put on your skin basically gets absorbed into your system.
Mm.
So just that, where can I minimize my exposure, minimize my toxic load, um, might be a really good place to start.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then also like maybe opt in for more organic, whole food choices as well.
Look, the agricultural system last year worldwide sprayed 300 billion kilograms of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides on our food.
Mm.
And everyone's walking around scratching their head going, gee, I wonder why we're all sick.
Yeah,
Well, maybe, just
yeah.
might be in part due to the stuff we're spraying on our food, which ends
Mm.
up in our water supply, and there's all this stuff in our air. I mean, we live in a very toxic world. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, we can only be as healthy as the environment that we exist in. The health of our environment is going to be a direct reflection on human health. We
Yeah.
can't be healthy in a sick, toxic world. So we really need
Mhm.
to think about cleaning up our act as a collective, as a species,
Yeah,
rather than just turning a blind eye and going, ah, that's all right, I'll just pop a pill and expect all my problems to go away.
I
Because we
know.
never deal with the true cause of the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I also recommend a lot is meditation, allowing the nervous system to just recalibrate itself and release stress. Because I think stress is a huge, like, stress is one word, it's like one label for a very broad range of factors, isn't it? But I think stress is actually one of the biggest. causes of a lot of our disharmony as well. Do you meditate?
Yeah, I do. I do a fair bit of it. The whole stress thing, I think, is very interesting.
Mm.
Our ancestors didn't have stress, and if they did, it was very, very minimal, and it would only exist within a
In the
very short
moment.
period of time,
Yeah.
and then it would be gone. But now, we have a lot of this so-called stress in our life. And I mean, we throw this word around, but we never really think about what it means. When you're stressed, you're thinking about things that haven't, or you're worrying about things that haven't happened yet. It's like something might happen. This thing might happen next week, or I've got this thing coming, it's looming on the horizon, or you're dwelling on things in the past,
Mm.
and you're creating this inner turmoil inside yourself,
Yeah.
and you're labeling that as stress. But you see, when you bring your attention back to the present moment and you exist in the now, you're no longer worrying about those things that haven't happened yet that may not ever actually happen.
Yeah.
And you're not dwelling in the past. Now, when you go into nature, your attention, your conscious awareness comes back to the present moment. And that's why they say it's so good to be outside for stress reduction purposes. This is why things like meditation can be really good, because you're bringing your awareness back to the moment and you're not worrying about things that aren't really that important in the grand scheme of it. Now, when you are doing that, when you're worrying about things that have, when you're dwelling on things in the past and worrying about things in the future that haven't happened, that can use up a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So you get to the end of the day and you're just, oh, I'm just exhausted. I've just been so stressed. No, you
Yeah.
haven't. You've had a lack of conscious control or conscious awareness. When you start to do meditation and these kinds of mindfulness practices, instead of that energy being lost worrying and thinking about things that aren't in the moment, that energy now starts to build up inside you. And that energy can then be used to heal the body, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So this is one of the reasons why mindfulness and meditation is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that energy is just not available for the body to do what it needs to do.
Exactly. And that's one of the best kind of antidotes to this problem that women have of being overburdened and overwhelmed and overworked, is taking some time every day for stillness will help to fill that inner tank back up again, won't it?
Most of these problems are a much deeper societal issue
Yeah.
that will take a lot of rectifying
Yeah.
to get to the bottom of. And unfortunately, people have just become really comfortable in this modern society that they're not willing to give up a lot of these so-called creature comforts.
Mhm.
And I think the only real way that we can regain control of our health is to take a feather out of our ancestors' cap and go, right, you guys had something right going on there. You had something good going on there. You weren't walking around with menopause or autoimmune disease or depression or whatever, and you were living a certain way. So maybe that's a great message or a lesson for us to learn from our mistakes and start to reconnect with the way that our ancestors were doing things. Because this
Yeah.
stuff is not complicated. It's
Nope.
actually very simple, but it's not
Yeah.
necessarily easy.
Yeah, it's like we could talk about it all day and you could never run out of things to say about, like, why do we have hot flushes, this, that, and the other, but it all boils down to the same thing at the end of the day, which is go back to nature, go back to simplicity, go back to whole foods, go back to mindfulness, stay in the now, you know? And then people say, yes, but that's so hard, isn't it? I'm like, I actually don't find it hard. It's one of the easiest things in the world for me. But yeah, okay. So as much as we could talk about it all day, I think I'm going to start wrapping it up about here because I think that's a really nice
Sure.
place to leave it. But one other question I did have for you was, are you writing any new books? Are you going to bring out a book about menopause symptoms or?
Um, Maybe there's so many different things that I could write on. I am currently working on another project. I don't know how long it's going to be until that's done, but I'm still sort of recovering from my last one because it took me
Right.
4 years, and
Yeah.
I need a little bit of rest in between projects. But rest assured, something is coming in the near future. May not necessarily be on menopause specifically, but it will cover a lot of these sort of aspects and points that we've touched on today.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. And I'll link your previous book and your website and any other information you want to give me into the show notes of this. And then it'll be available on the podcast. And I'll also put it up on YouTube as well.
Great.
All
Thanks so
right.
much, Carolyn.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome to speak with you. Thanks again and keep up the good work.
You too.
Thanks.